The air in the grand atrium of the Metropolitan Museum of Art was thick with the scent of money and lilies. A string quartet played Vivaldi, but the real music was the murmur of 1,000 conversations, each a delicate dance of power, influence, and ambition. This was the annual Croft Foundation Gala, the crown jewel of New York City's philanthropic calendar, and at its center stood Julian Croft. At 72, Julian moved with the deliberate grace of a man who had bent the world to his will. His hair was the color of a winter sky, his suit a bespoke creation of such dark, immaculate navy that it seemed to absorb the light around him. His empire was built on real estate, on steel and glass monuments that reshaped skylines. But tonight was about his legacy. Tonight, he was to announce a $500 million endowment for a new medical research wing, a final, definitive monument to a life of success. Everything had to be perfect. His reputation, the very foundation of his world, was built on a bedrock of absolute precision. He did not tolerate mistakes, he did not forgive incompetence, and he certainly did not abide tardiness, which is why his gaze, sharp and cold as a shard of glass, was fixed on a single glaring imperfection in the otherwise flawless tapestry of the evening, an empty pedestal beside his guest of honor, where a flute of vintage Krug champagne should have been. He was in quiet conversation with Mayor Thompson, a man whose political career Julian had discreetly and substantially bankrolled. This conversation was the final handshake, the silent agreement before the grand announcement. The champagne was not merely a drink, it was a prop, a punctuation mark in the theater of power. Its absence was a disruption to the script. "Everything is in order, Julian," the mayor was saying, his smile broad and practiced. "The city is indebted to your generosity." Julian's jaw tightened. "It appears my generosity doesn't extend to my own table," he said, his voice a low growl that was meant for his chief of staff, but was overheard by the mayor. He scanned the bustling floor, his eyes sweeping past senators and socialites, searching for the source of this infuriating lapse. He saw her then, a young woman moving through the gilded crowd with a harried, desperate energy that was painfully out of place. Her uniform, a simple black dress and white apron, was neat, but a few strands of auburn hair had escaped her tight bun, clinging to a forehead damp with perspiration. She was balancing a tray laden with champagne flutes, her expression a mask of frantic panic. She was the cater waiter. She was the problem. Clara Evans felt as if her heart was going to beat its way out of her chest. An hour ago, she had been in a hospital emergency room, holding her younger brother Leo's hand as a doctor stitched a gash in his forehead. A simple fall from the playground monkey bars had turned into a 4-hour ordeal that had made her catastrophically late for her shift. Pleading with her supervisor, a woman with a face like a clenched fist, had earned her no sympathy, only a threat of immediate termination if one more thing went wrong. This catering gig was one of 3 jobs she juggled to pay the rent on their tiny apartment in the Bronx, and more importantly, to afford the astronomical cost of Leo's epilepsy medication. Being fired wasn't an option. It was a free fall into ruin. She had been tasked with serving the VIP table, the Croft table. "Mr. Croft is a man of particular standards," her supervisor had hissed. "Do not be slow. Do not be clumsy. Do not exist other than to serve." Now navigating the labyrinth of couture gowns and $1,000 suits, she felt the weight of Julian Croft's stare before she even reached the table. It was a physical pressure, cold and immense. "Your champagne, sir," she murmured, her voice breathless as she reached his side. She leaned forward, her hand trembling almost imperceptibly as she placed the flute on the small pedestal. Julian didn't look at her. He looked at his watch, a Patek Philippe Celestial that was worth more than her entire life's earnings. 11 minutes, he said, his voice low, yet carrying with chilling clarity in the small bubble of their conversation. "I have been standing here for 20 minutes. It took you 11 of them to bring a single glass of champagne. Explain yourself." Clara froze, her blood turning to ice water in her veins. Her mind scrambled for an excuse, a plausible lie, but his cold, dismissive glare seemed to strip the thoughts from her head. The truth about Leo, the hospital, the terror of it all, felt too raw, too personal, too much like a pathetic excuse. I, I apologize, sir. The bar was overwhelmed. It won't happen again. No, Julian snapped, and this time he did turn his piercing gaze on her. It felt like being pinned to a board. It certainly will not, because you are clearly not suited for a position that requires a fundamental understanding of time and priority. In my world, an 11-minute delay on a simple task indicates a catastrophic failure of character. It reveals a lack of discipline, a lack of respect. It is an insult. The conversations at the neighboring tables faltered. People pretended to admire the rodent sculpture nearby, but their attention was focused, like moths to a flame, on the unfolding drama. Clara felt a hot, mortifying blush creep up her neck. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. She willed herself not to cry, not here, not in front of this monument of a man. Sir, do not sir me, he cut her off, his voice rising just enough to command the attention of the entire section. I am paying for excellence. I am paying for perfection. I am not paying to be a spectator to your incompetence. He lifted his chin and called out, his voice ringing with absolute authority. Helen! His chief of staff, a woman in her 50s with a severe haircut and an expression of permanent anxiety, was at his side in an instant. Yes, Mr. Croft. Remove her, Julian said with a flick of his wrist, a gesture one might use to dismiss a fly. She's fired. I don't want to see her again tonight. Clara's world tilted. Fired, just like that. The word was a gunshot in the pristine quiet of her panic. This job, this lifeline that paid for Leo's medicine, was gone. A cold, sharp dread, worse than any humiliation, pierced through her. Sir, please, she whispered, her voice cracking with a desperation she hated. I need this job. It was the worst thing she could have said. It was an admission of weakness, of need. Julian Croft had built his empire by eradicating weakness. He saw it as a contagion. His expression, already hard, settled into one of profound disgust. Your needs, he said, his voice dripping with condescension as he leaned in slightly, are of absolutely no consequence to me. He was about to turn away to erase her from his reality, but as she took an involuntary step backward, stumbling slightly, the strap of her apron snagged on the corner of the pedestal. The contents of her deep apron pocket spilled onto the polished marble floor. A pen, a small notepad, a set of keys, and a small, intricately carved wooden box. The box, no bigger than her palm, landed with a soft, resonant clatter. The tiny, delicate clasp sprung open on impact, and from within the dark wood, a fragile, haunting melody began to play. It was a simple tune, a mere 8 bars of music, melancholic and yet full of a strange, childlike hope. The sound was tiny, almost lost beneath the Vivaldi and the chatter, but for Julian Croft, it was a thunderclap that silenced the world. The tirade died on his lips. The mayor, the gala, the $500 million endowment, it all dissolved into a meaningless, roaring void. All he could hear was that melody, a melody he had not heard in 10 years, a melody composed by his daughter Lila on her 16th birthday. He had commissioned this very music box from a master craftsman in Switzerland as a gift for her. It was one of a kind. It was the last gift he had ever given her. 10 years ago, his daughter, his only child, had vanished from a Swiss boarding school. The official report, compiled by the best investigators his money could buy, concluded she had run away, likely fallen in with a bad crowd, and met a tragic, untraceable end. She was gone. The music box, which she had treasured, was gone with her, and now its impossible song was tinkling up from the floor at the feet of a clumsy, incompetent waitress he had just eviscerated in public. The world stopped spinning. Julian Croft, the man who was never caught off guard, was suddenly adrift in a sea of utter disbelief and a terrifying, agonizing surge of hope. His voice, when he finally found it, was a strangled, raw whisper, unrecognizable even to himself. Where? He choked out, his eyes locked on the impossible object on the floor. Where did you get that? The shift in Julian Croft's demeanor was so sudden and so total that it felt like a tectonic plate had slipped beneath the museum floor. One moment, he was a volcano of cold, righteous fury. The next, he was a statue of ice, his face, moments before a mask of rage, now a canvas of ghostly white. His eyes, wide and unblinking, were fixed on the small wooden box, now silent on the marble. An emotion Clara couldn't begin to decipher churned in their depths. It was a maelstrom of shock, horror, and something that looked terrifyingly like raw, exposed pain. Marcus Thorne, standing a few tables away, leaned forward, his ever-present smirk replaced by a look of sharp, predatory curiosity. As Julian's former business partner and now his most bitter rival, Marcus had a connoisseur's palate for Julian's misfortunes. He began to drift closer. Julian ignored him. He ignored the mayor, who was muttering something about getting some air. His entire universe had contracted to the space between him and the waitress. "The music box," he repeated, his voice raspy, insistent. "I asked you a question." Clara, bewildered by the violent shift in his attention, instinctively knelt and scooped up the box, her fingers closing over the polished wood. It was a protective gesture she had made 1,000 times. The box was her most sacred possession, her only tangible link to a promise she had made. The sudden, intense focus on it from this terrifying man sent a new wave of fear through her, colder and sharper than the fear of being fired. Was he going to accuse her of stealing it? It was a gift, she stammered, pushing herself back to her feet and taking a half step away from him. Her mind was a chaotic whirlwind of confusion and adrenaline. "A gift from whom?" Julian pressed. He took a step toward her, his towering frame casting a long shadow. The raw power he projected had changed. It was no longer the arrogance of a billionaire, but the desperate, focused energy of a predator. Clara felt cornered. The story of the music box was private, a memory wrapped in sadness and a profound sense of duty. It was a secret she had never shared. The thought of this cruel, powerful man laying claim to it, even with a question, felt like a deep and profound violation. "I don't believe that's any of your business, sir," she said, a spark of defiance she didn't know she possessed cutting through her fear. Julian's eyes narrowed. In any other circumstance, that single sentence of insolence would have been the final nail in her professional coffin. But this was not any other circumstance. This was a ghost story coming to life at the most public event of the year. He remembered the melody. He remembered the unique inlay of mother of pearl on the lid, a tiny, almost invisible rendering of the constellation Lyra. He had commissioned it for his Lila, his brilliant, fiercely independent, and deeply troubled daughter. She had been the only truly beautiful thing in his life, a life otherwise filled with brutal negotiations and calculated alliances. When she vanished, the music in his world had stopped. Now here it was again. "I will ask you one more time," Julian said, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet register. "Tell me where you got that music box. It is of vital, earth-shattering importance to me." Marcus Thorne, who had finally reached their table, let out a low chuckle. "For heaven's sake, Julian, it's a trinket. The girl probably bought it at a flea market. Don't cause a scene. It's bad for your image." "Stay out of this, Marcus," Julian snarled, the sound so venomous it made Thorne take a half step back. He turned back to Clara. He pulled out his wallet, the fine Italian leather sighing as it opened. He extracted a thick stack of $100 bills, easily several $1,000s, and thrust them toward her. "I'll buy it from you," he said, his gaze flicking between her face and the box clutched in her hand. "Right now. $5,000 for that little wooden box." The insult was reflexive, a lifelong habit of devaluing things to control them. But Clara wasn't insulted. She was horrified. Sell the music box? She would sooner sell her own hand. "No," she said, her voice firm now, the fear being eclipsed by a fierce, protective anger. "It is not for sale." 10,000, he countered instantly, his eyes manic. 20. Name your price. I want that box." The spectacle of this powerful man, this captain of industry, unraveling over a simple music box at his own gala, was deeply surreal. The crowd was now watching openly, their whispers a rising tide. Clara stared at him, and for the first time she saw past the tyrant. She saw a crack in his formidable armor, a glimpse of a man drowning in an ocean of unseen grief. "Sir," she said, her voice steady and clear, With all due respect, you could offer me your entire real estate empire. I would not sell you this music box. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe I have been fired." She turned to leave, her legs feeling like lead. She had to get out of there, away from the prying eyes, away from this man's terrifying, inexplicable grief, before she completely fell apart. "Wait!" Julian's voice was a command that rooted her to the spot. He sank back against the table, running a hand over his face. He looked utterly lost. The ruthless CEO had vanished, replaced by a desperate father. He knew with a certainty that was both chilling and exhilarating that the music box was Lila's. There were only two possibilities. Either this waitress had found it, or worse, she was somehow connected to its theft, and by extension, to his daughter's disappearance. The cold case had haunted him for a decade. A splinter of unresolved agony lodged deep in his soul. He had to change tactics. The bully had failed. The buyer had failed. Now he had to be something else. Something he hadn't been in a very long time. "Please," he said. The word sounded foreign on his tongue, rusty from a decade of disuse. The apology that followed was even more so. "Don't go. I apologize. For my behavior." The apology hung in the air, so stunning and so utterly out of character that it silenced the entire atrium. Vivaldi's quartet faltered, the last note hanging in the air like a question mark. Marcus Thorne's eyebrows shot up into his hairline. Julian continued, his voice softer now, laced with an urgency that was impossible to fake. "My reaction was inexcusable, but that music box, it belonged to my daughter." He paused, the next words catching in his throat like shards of glass. "My daughter, Lila, she disappeared 10 years ago. That box was lost with her. Seeing it now, hearing it, I don't understand." Clara turned back slowly, her own anger dissolving into a confusing wave of empathy. His daughter. The words reframed everything. The music box wasn't just a treasured memento of a promise. It was a direct link to this man's profound and tragic past. Her simple, difficult life had just violently collided with a world of unimaginable wealth and sorrow. And at the center of it all was a mystery she never knew she was a part of. "We need to talk," Julian said, his eyes pleading, stripped of all artifice. "Not here, somewhere private. I will compensate you for your time, for the distress I've caused you. I will see to it that you are not fired. I'll do anything, but you have to tell me how you came to possess my daughter's music box." She looked at Julian Croft, truly looked at him, and saw a father searching for the ghost of his child across a decade of silence. She knew, with a sinking and inevitable certainty, that she had no choice. "Okay," she heard herself say, the single word sealing her fate. "We'll talk." Clara's apartment was a cramped third-floor walk-up in the Bronx, where the hallway smelled of fried onions, and the distant wail of sirens was a constant, restless lullaby. The entire space could have fit comfortably inside the men's room of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. It was cluttered with art supplies, canvases leaning against the walls, and textbooks for her online art history classes. But it was clean, and it was a sanctuary. She sank onto the lumpy sofa, the events of the evening replaying in a dizzying loop. Humiliated, fired, unfired, offered a small fortune, and then handed a revelation that had shaken her to her core. The music box, her most precious secret, belonged to a billionaire's long-lost daughter. Her brother Leo, a bright-eyed 8-year-old with a fresh white bandage on his forehead, was asleep in the only bedroom. He was the reason for her exhaustion, her fear, and her fierce determination. He was her whole world. She placed the music box on the scarred coffee table, running her fingers over the inlaid mother-of-pearl constellation. For 5 years it had been her private symbol of a promise, a reminder of a fleeting, desperate friendship, and a whispered, cryptic farewell. Now it felt heavier, freighted with a history that was not her own. The memory was as sharp and vivid as if it had happened yesterday. It was 5 years ago. She had been 19, a scholarship student at Cooper Union, barely scraping by. She'd had a part-time job at a small, independent coffee shop in the East Village. A girl started coming in every day. She was pale and thin, with wide, haunted eyes that seemed to see things no one else did. She dressed in worn jeans and oversized sweaters, but she had an air of quiet, broken elegance about her. She called herself Anna. Anna never talked about her past. She sketched furiously in a worn notebook and drank black coffee, paying with crumpled dollar bills. A strange, powerful bond formed between them in the quiet hours of the afternoon, two lonely souls finding a moment of reprieve. Clara saw a fellow artist. She saw a friend. She also saw a girl who was terrified. Anna would jump at the sound of the bell over the door, her eyes scanning the street with a paranoid intensity. "Some cages are beautiful," Anna had told her once, her voice barely a whisper as she stared into her coffee cup. "Polished gold and silk pillows. It doesn't make them any less of a cage." Then one rainy Tuesday, Anna came in looking more frightened than ever. Her face was bruised, a dark purple mark blooming on her cheekbone. She was trembling. "I have to go," she had whispered, pressing a small, paper-wrapped package into Clara's hands. "He found me. I don't know how, but he found me." "Who found you?" Clara had asked, her heart pounding. "It doesn't matter. There's no escaping him. Or my father. They're two sides of the same coin." She had pushed the package firmly into Clara's palm. "This was mine. It's the only thing left of the girl I used to be. I can't be her anymore. This is a key, and if I keep it, he'll use it to unlock my door." Clara had looked at the desperation in her friend's eyes. "What do you want me to do with it?" Anna's final words had been cryptic, a strange and desperate piece of poetry. "Keep it safe. If anyone ever recognizes this music, it means they might be able to help. It means they can be trusted. Tell them I went to find the sea." And then she was gone. She walked out into the rain and vanished as if she had been a ghost all along. Clara had unwrapped the package to find the music box. She had reported Anna's disappearance, but with no last name and no real information, the police report went nowhere. The girl named Anna simply ceased to exist. Now sitting in her cramped apartment, the truth was sickeningly clear. Anna was Lila Croft. The violent he she was running from wasn't just a possessive ex-boyfriend, and the father she was escaping was the man she was scheduled to meet the following afternoon. He had promised to take care of Leo's medical bills for a year. The offer was a lifeline so substantial it made her dizzy. It could change everything. It could give Leo a stability she had only dreamed of. But the price was this story, this secret. It felt like a betrayal of Anna, of Lila, to share her last desperate words with the very man she had been running from. She clutched the music box to her chest. Lila had trusted her. "Tell them I went to find the sea." It wasn't just a farewell, it was a message. And Clara was beginning to realize she was the only person in the world who could deliver it. The question was, could she trust Julian Croft? The cruel tyrant from the gala and the broken father from the aftermath were two different men. She had to decide which one was real. The cafe Clara chose was a small, unassuming place in Greenwich Village, with the scent of old books and brewing coffee clinging to the air. It was a world away from Julian Croft's natural habitat of boardrooms and exclusive restaurants. She had insisted on neutral territory. This would be on her terms. He arrived precisely on time, looking just as out of place as she had imagined. He wore a simple gray cashmere sweater and dark trousers, a deliberate attempt to appear less intimidating, but he still carried with him an aura of immense, unyielding power. He sat opposite her in the worn wooden booth, the silence between them thick with a decade of grief and 5 years of secrets. "Thank you for coming," Julian said finally. His voice today was stripped of all its previous arrogance. It just sounded old and tired. "You said you wanted to talk," Clara replied, her hands wrapped around a warm mug of tea for courage. "The music box," he said, his eyes fixed on it where it sat on the table between them. "You said it was a gift. Please tell me the truth." Clara took a deep, steadying breath and began her story. She told him about the quiet, haunted girl named Anna, who sketched in a coffee shop 5 years ago. She described her fear, her elegance, the bruise on her cheek. She recounted Anna's cryptic words about gilded cages and the two men she was running from. As she spoke, she watched Julian's face. Every word landed like a physical blow. The careful composure he had worn into the cafe began to disintegrate. His skin grew pale and a muscle jumped in his jaw when she described Lila pressing the box into her hand. When she repeated Lila's final message, "Tell them I went to find the sea," his eyes, which had been dry and hard, glistened with unshed tears. "She was alive," he whispered, the words a mix of agony and wonder. 5 years ago, she was alive and here in New York. "The official story," Clara said gently. "The one the press reported 10 years ago. They said she ran away. They implied she was dead," Julian finished the word for her. He looked away, his gaze lost in the bustling street outside. The truth, when he finally spoke, was a confession that had been poisoning him for a decade. "That story was a lie, a fabrication I created to protect her." Clara stared at him, stunned. "You lied about your own daughter's disappearance?" "I had to," he said, his voice heavy with a guilt that seemed to weigh down the very air around them. The story poured out of him, a torrent of secrets and regret. Lila wasn't just a runaway, she was being hunted. There was a young man, William Thorne, the son of my then partner, Marcus Thorne. The name hit Clara like a punch to the gut. Marcus Thorne, the man from the gala last night, the one who had watched their interaction with such hungry interest. "William was obsessed with her," Julian continued. "It started as a teenage crush, but it festered into something dark, something possessive and violent. He was manipulative. He began to stalk her, threatening any boy who even looked at her. We got a restraining order, but the Thorne family had money and influence. It was useless." His face contorted in a grimace of remembered fear. "We had William investigated. He had a sealed juvenile record for assault. He told Lila that if he couldn't have her, no one would. He described in gruesome detail what he would do to her. We went to the police, but with no direct physical attack. Their hands were tied. It was just a rich boy's word against a rich girl's." "So you helped her disappear," Clara breathed, the pieces clicking into a horrifying new arrangement. "It was my only option," he said, his voice cracking. "We staged the runaway story. I paid a fortune to create a new identity for her, to get her out of the country to a secure, undisclosed location in Europe where she could finish her art studies in peace. I thought I was saving her. I thought I was putting her in a safe new cage." He let out a bitter, self-loathing laugh. "She must have run from my people too. She didn't want my protection. She wanted to be free. For 10 years, I've had the best private investigators in the world searching for her, quietly. We never found a single trace. I began to believe she really was gone." He finally met Clara's eyes, his own swimming with a grief so profound it made her ache. "All these years, I thought she was running from William. But you're telling me she was still running 5 years ago, and she was running from me too." Lila hadn't just been running from a stalker. She had been running from a life of control, even a father's desperate, protective control. "And Marcus Thorne," Clara said, her mind racing. "He was there last night. He was watching us." Julian's expression darkened into something dangerous. "Marcus has never forgiven me. His son, William, died of a drug overdose 2 years after Lila vanished. Marcus blames her. He blames me. For the past year, he's been attempting a hostile takeover of my company. He drops hints, veiled comments about family secrets. He knows I'm vulnerable. I believe he suspects Lila is alive. He's using my secret, my fear, to try and destroy everything I've built." Suddenly, the encounter at the gala took on a sinister, new meaning. Julian's rage hadn't just been about a late glass of champagne. It had been the lashing out of a man under siege from all sides, haunted by his past and hunted by his rival. Clara looked at the music box on the table. This small, beautiful object was the epicenter of a web of lies, fear, and heartbreak. It connected a dead stalker, a grieving father, a ruthless rival, and a lost girl who had simply wanted to disappear. "So the girl I met," Clara said slowly, "wasn't just Anna. She was Lila, and she was still hiding." "Yes," Julian said, his voice breaking. "And I'm afraid that in trying to save her, I drove her into a world she was completely unprepared for." He looked at Clara, his desperation laid bare, all pride gone. "You are the first real lead I have had in 10 years. You are the only person who has seen my daughter and lived to tell the tale. I need your help. I need you to help me understand her message. I need you to help me find my daughter." The quiet cafe became the command center for the unlikeliest of alliances. The ruthless real estate mogul and the struggling artist Waitress, bound by the ghost of a girl they both knew by a different name. Julian, galvanized by the first real glimmer of hope in a decade, transformed. The weight of his grief was replaced by the sharp, focused energy of a man on a mission. He made a single phone call, and within the hour, a man named David Chen arrived. He was in his late 40s, with a quiet, unassuming demeanor that belied a mind like a steel trap. He was, Julian explained, the former FBI agent who had been heading his private investigation team for the last 10 years, chasing shadows and following cold trails across the globe. Chen listened without interruption as Clara recounted for the third time her story of meeting Anna. He didn't treat it as a memory. He treated it as a primary source document, recording every detail: the name of the coffee shop, the approximate dates, her physical appearance, the bruise, and her exact cryptic final words. "A coffee shop in the East Village 5 years ago is a starting point," Chen said, his voice calm and methodical. "The alias Anna is a new variable, but the message is the most important part. I went to find the sea." "It could mean anything," Julian said, frustration creeping into his voice. "The coast of California? The shores of Long Island?" "Or it could be a metaphor," Clara offered quietly. "Lila, Anna, was an artist. The sea can mean freedom, escape, a vastness where you can lose yourself." Chen nodded, his eyes on Clara. "You knew her in a way no one else did. Your intuition is as valuable as any security footage." He then turned his attention to a more immediate threat. "Marcus Thorne," Chen said to Julian, "your instincts were correct. We've been monitoring his financials for the past 6 months in relation to the takeover attempt. There are a series of discrete, untraceable payments being made to a security firm known for its aggressive tactics and morally flexible operatives." "He's not just suspecting she's alive," Julian murmured, his hands clenching into fists. "He's been actively searching for her, too, all while holding this takeover over my head as a guillotine." The picture was becoming chillingly clear. Marcus Thorne, twisted by grief and a thirst for vengeance over his son's death, had likely been hunting Lila just as relentlessly as Julian had. The corporate battle was just a smokescreen for a deeply personal vendetta. He wanted to destroy Julian by finding and exposing the one secret that could bring him to his knees. The investigation began on two fronts. One of Chen's teams started a digital deep dive, cross-referencing art school enrollments, gallery submissions, and communal artist residencies under the name Anna from 5 years ago. The other team focused on Marcus Thorne, placing him under subtle but constant surveillance. A few days later, the threat became terrifyingly real. Clara was walking home from her evening shift at a diner, a new job Julian's foundation had quietly arranged for her, when a sleek black town car pulled up beside her. The back window slid down, revealing Marcus Thorne. His smirk was gone, replaced by an expression of cold reptilian focus. "Ms. Evans," he said, his voice smooth as polished stone. "We haven't been properly introduced, and I'm Marcus Thorne. I believe you have something that belongs to an old friend of mine." Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She clutched her shoulder bag, where the music box was safely wrapped in cloth. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't play games with me, girl," he said, his voice losing its silken edge. "The little music box. Julian is a sentimental old fool. He's chasing a ghost. But that box isn't a memory. It's a liability. A loose end. I want it." He gestured to the seat beside him. "I am prepared to offer you a sum of money that would make Julian's little charity look like pocket change. Enough to take care of you and that sick little brother of yours for the rest of your lives." The mention of Leo sent a spike of pure ice through her veins. He had investigated her. He knew about Leo. This wasn't a request, it was a threat. "It's not for sale," she said, her voice shaking but firm. Marcus's face hardened. "Everything is for sale. You're a smart girl. You're also in a very precarious position. Accidents happen. People get hurt. A child's health can be so fragile. Think about my offer." The window slid up and the car pulled away, leaving Clara trembling with rage and fear on the darkened street. She immediately called Chen, who assured her that a security detail was already in place and that Leah was safe. But the confrontation solidified her resolve. This wasn't just about finding Lila anymore. It was about protecting her from a monster. The breakthrough came a week later from the digital team. They had found it, an application under the name Anna Gable for a highly competitive, secluded artist colony. The application was dated 5 years ago, shortly after she had vanished from the coffee shop. The application included a portfolio of sketches. When Chen showed the images to Julian on a tablet, the old man let out a ragged sob. They were Lila's. Her style was unmistakable. The colony was called Seafoam Reach. It was located in a tiny remote town on the coast of Maine. "I went to find the sea," Clara whispered, chills running down her spine. It wasn't a metaphor, it was a destination. "Book 3 plane tickets to Bangor, Maine," Julian said to his assistant over the phone, his voice electric with renewed purpose. He looked at Chen, then at Clara. "We're going to Seafoam Reach." He was chasing a 5-year-old lead, a ghost from a life he didn't even know his daughter had lived. But for the first time in a decade, he felt he was following his daughter's footsteps, not just the cold, empty trail of her absence. And he needed Clara, the keeper of her secret and the target of his enemy, to be there with him. He was no longer just searching for his daughter, he was trying to save her. Seafoam Reach was less a town and more a scattering of salt-bleached houses clinging to a rocky stretch of the Maine coastline. The air smelled of low tide and pine needles, and the only sounds were the cry of gulls and the relentless, rhythmic crash of the Atlantic against the shore. It was the perfect place to be lost. It was the perfect place to be found. Julian, Clara, and Chen checked into the town's only inn, a rambling wooden structure with a wide porch overlooking the turbulent gray water. The change in environment was a shock to Julian's system. Here, his name meant nothing. His wealth was an irrelevant foreign language. He was just another man, an anxious father searching for a ghost. Their destination was the artist's colony, a rustic campus of studios and cabins nestled in the woods at the edge of a cliff. The director was a woman in her 60s with kind, weathered eyes and paint-stained hands named Eleanor Vance. Chen handled the introduction, explaining they were trying to locate a relative, a young artist who might have been there years ago. He showed her the photograph of Lila from 10 years prior, the one from her school ID. Eleanor studied it, then shook her head. "I'm sorry, I don't recognize this girl. We have hundreds of artists pass through here." Julian's heart sank. It was another dead end. But Clara, remembering the portfolio, had an idea. "Her name was Anna Gable," she said. "She was a sketch artist, charcoal and pencil, mostly portraits. Very intense, emotional work." Eleanor's expression shifted. "Anna? Of course, I remember Anna. She was here about 5 years back. A brilliant talent, but so wounded. A very private girl. She kept to herself, stayed for a 6-month residency." "She was here," Julian breathed, a wave of relief so profound it nearly buckled his knees. "She made it. She was safe." "Was?" Chen asked, his sharp ears picking up on the past tense in Eleanor's voice. Eleanor's kind face grew sad. "Anna left after her residency was over. We offered her a fellowship to stay on, but she said she couldn't. She said she had found what she came for, and it was time to move on." She paused, her gaze drifting toward the sea. "A few months after she left, I heard from another artist that she had passed away. A terrible accident, a car crash somewhere down south. I was heartbroken. Such a tragic loss of talent." The relief that had flooded Julian's system turned to ice. It couldn't be. Not again. To find her, to come so close, only to learn he was years too late. A lie he had created had become a horrifying, twisted truth. He had lost her twice. He staggered back, and Clara reached out to steady his arm, her own heart breaking for him. The grief in his eyes was absolute, a black hole of despair. But Clara's mind was racing. An accident? It felt too neat, too convenient. Lila had vanished from the coffee shop after being found. What if this was the same thing? "Did she have any friends here?" Clara asked, her voice urgent. "Anyone she was close to?" Eleanor thought for a moment. "Just one, really. A sculptor named Ben. He was quite taken with her. He lives in town now." Runs the local gallery. The gallery was a small, light-filled space on the town's main street. A man with a kind smile and clay under his fingernails was arranging pottery on a shelf. It was Ben. He recognized the name Anna immediately. His face lit up with a sad, fond memory. Anna, she was unforgettable, a force of nature. I haven't seen her in years. We were told she died, Chen said, watching the man's reaction carefully. Ben's face clouded with confusion. Died? No. Who told you that? He shook his head. That's impossible. I get a postcard from her every year. No return address, always postmarked from a different city. Just a picture of the ocean and a single sentence on the back. It's her way of letting me know she's okay. Julian's head snapped up. She's alive? Of course she's alive, Ben said. She faked her death. She told me the plan before she left. She said there was a man hunting her, a dangerous man from her past, and the only way to be truly free was to die. She staged the car accident, sold the story to a few people in the art world she knew would spread it around. She created a final, perfect disappearance. Lila hadn't just run. She had erased herself. She had orchestrated her own death to escape Marcus Thorne. The postcard, Julian demanded, his voice a hoarse whisper. When did the last one arrive? About a week ago, Ben said. He went to a drawer behind the counter and pulled out a small stack of postcards. The most recent one was a photograph of a dramatic, windswept coastline. On the back, in Lila's elegant, familiar script, was a single sentence. The light here is different. The postmark was clear. Carmel by the Sea, California. Julian stared at his daughter's handwriting. The lies, the chases, the years of silent grief had all led to this. A postcard, a final clue. At that moment, Chen's phone buzzed. He listened for a moment, his face grim. Sir, he said to Julian, Marcus Thorne's private jet landed in Monterey, California, an hour ago. The hunt was not over. It was culminating. Marcus, through his own dark network, had found the same trail. It was a race to the sea, a race to find Lila before the man who had haunted her for over a decade could finally corner his prey. Carmel by the Sea was a world of fairy tale cottages, art galleries, and the raw, staggering beauty of the Pacific coast. It was a place for artists, for dreamers, for those seeking refuge. They found Lila listed in the registry of a local artists' co-op under a new name, Chloe Mayer, a painter of seascapes. Her cottage was small, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean, surrounded by a riot of wildflowers. Julian's heart was a painful, frantic drum in his chest. 10 years. After 10 years of searching, he was standing at his daughter's door. He raised a trembling hand and knocked. The woman who opened the door was, and was not his daughter. She was 30 now, no longer the girl he remembered. Her dark hair was cut short, streaked with gray at the temples. There were fine lines around her eyes that were still his, but held a lifetime of pain and resilience he couldn't comprehend. She was thinner, harder, but she was alive. She was real. Her eyes widened in shock, then instantly narrowed, a wall of pure, unadulterated fury slamming down. How? She whispered, the word a sliver of ice. How did you find me? Lila, Julian began, his voice thick with a decade of unshed emotion. Don't call me that, she snapped. That person is dead. You should know. You wrote her obituary yourself. The bitterness in her voice was a physical blow. This was not the joyful, tearful reunion he had foolishly allowed himself to imagine. This was a confrontation with a ghost who did not want to be resurrected. Lila, I just wanted to know you were safe, he pleaded. Safe? She let out a harsh, broken laugh. I was safe until you brought your world back to my doorstep. I built a life here, a quiet life, a life where I didn't have to look over my shoulder every second, waiting for William's ghost or your suffocating control to find me. She looked past him and saw Clara standing a few feet behind. Her eyes fell to the music box Clara was holding. You, she said, her voice softening with a flicker of old familiarity before hardening again with betrayal. You led him to me. She was trying to help, Julian said. Help? Lila's voice rose, trembling with a rage that had been simmering for years. Was it help when you faked my disappearance and tried to ship me off to Europe like a piece of precious cargo? Was it help when your answer to everything was more money, more security, another gilded cage? You and William were two sides of the same coin. He wanted to own my body and you wanted to own my life. I didn't run from him, Dad. I ran from both of you. Her words hit Julian with the force of a physical assault, because he knew in the deepest part of his soul that they were true. As the raw, painful words hung in the air, a car pulled up behind them. Marcus Thorne emerged, his face a mask of triumphant rage. He had followed them. Well, well, Marcus said, his voice dripping with venom as he took in the scene. The prodigal daughter returns. Or is she the cause of all our sorrows? My son is dead because of you, you little witch. Lila flinched as if struck. Julian stepped in front of her, shielding her. This is over, Marcus. Over? Marcus laughed, a hollow, rattling sound. It's just beginning. I'm not going to hurt her. I'm just going to make sure the whole world knows the truth. The story of the runaway who drove my boy to his grave. The story of the great Julian Croft and his web of lies. I will destroy her peace, Julian. I will shatter this little life she's built, just as she shattered mine. It was the ultimate act of vengeance. Not violence, but exposure. He would drag her back into the world she had nearly died to escape. But then Clara stepped forward, holding the music box. This was never about you, Mr. Thorne, she said, her voice clear and steady. She looked at Lila, not with pity, but with a deep, quiet understanding. And it was never about your money, Mr. Croft. It was about this music. She opened the box. The fragile, haunting melody drifted into the salt-laced air. The tune Lila had written as a girl, a tune full of a hope she had long since abandoned. Lila, Clara said softly, you gave this to me and said if anyone recognized the music, they could be trusted. You trusted that your father would hear the song, not just the notes. You trusted he would remember the girl who wrote it, not just the daughter he lost. Lila stared at the box, tears finally welling in her haunted eyes. Julian looked at his daughter, at the artist she had become, at the stranger who was still his flesh and blood. He finally understood. He had spent 10 years and a fortune trying to find her, to possess her, to protect her. But he had never once just listened. She's right, Julian said, his voice stripped of all its power and authority, leaving only the raw, aching vulnerability of a father. I failed you, Lila. I didn't listen. I tried to solve your problems with money and power, because that's all I knew. I built you a cage because I was too afraid to let you build your own wings. I'm sorry. I am so profoundly sorry. He took a step back, giving her space. I will not ask you to come back. I will not ask for your forgiveness. I will leave, and I will take him with me, he said, gesturing to Marcus. And you will never see either of us again, if that is your wish. All I ever truly wanted was for you to be free. Marcus Thorne looked from Julian's broken face to Lila's tear-streaked one. The fire of his vengeance, which had burned for a decade, finally flickered and died. There was nothing left to destroy. He had been chasing ghosts, and in the end, he was the one who was truly haunted. He turned without a word and got back in his car, a man defeated not by power, but by a simple, long-overdue apology. The story of Julian Croft and the Waitress didn't end with a neat storybook reunion. It ended with a quiet, difficult, and hopeful beginning. Lila did not return to New York. She stayed in her cottage by the sea, in the life she had painstakingly built for herself, but she didn't close the door completely. A week after that confrontation on the cliff, Julian received a text message. It was a picture of a half-finished canvas, a seascape of the dawn. There were no words, none were needed. It was a start. Julian, a man fundamentally changed, withdrew his company from the public eye. He walked away from the hostile takeover battles and the endless pursuit of more. He poured his vast fortune into a new foundation, one dedicated to funding shelters for victims of domestic abuse and providing scholarships for young, struggling artists. It was named the Lila Foundation, not in memory of his daughter, but in honor of her strength. For Clara, her life was transformed. Julian paid for her brother Leo's medical care, ensuring he had the best doctors and a future free from the constant threat of a medical emergency. He didn't just give her money, He gave her freedom. He became a patron of her art, buying her first collection for his new foundation's headquarters and giving her the resources to paint full-time. He gave her a future she had never dreamed possible. But more than that, he gave her a family. She, Julian, and Leo became an unlikely trio, bound by a shared secret and a mutual respect. One sunny afternoon, months later, a package arrived at Julian's new, much smaller home. It was a large, flat canvas wrapped in simple brown paper. There was no note. He unwrapped it to find a stunning seascape, the one he had seen in the text message, now finished. The light in the painting was different, just as the postcard had said. It was the light of a new day. He hung it over his fireplace. Beside it, on the mantel, sat the small wooden music box. Its lid was open. Its song was a quiet, constant reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things are born from the most broken places. It was a reminder that true wealth isn't measured in skylines and endowments, but in second chances, in forgiveness, and in the courage it takes to finally listen to the music.